The transport vessel shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of deceleration. Captain Marcus Ghost Sullivan pressed his face against the small porthole, watching as the war-torn planet of Cathara Prime came into view. The surface was scarred with crater chains that stretched across continents, the remnants of orbital bombardments that had raged for the better part of 2 standard years. First time seeing a contested world, human? The voice belonged to Zixtal, a 7-foot-tall hegemony soldier whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the transport's artificial lighting. His 4 arms were crossed in what Marcus had learned was the Velnari equivalent of skepticism. Marcus didn't look away from the viewport. "No, but it's the first time I'm seeing one where I'm supposed to make a difference." A series of clicking sounds echoed through the transport bay. It took Marcus a moment to realize it was laughter, the harsh, guttural amusement of the Karathi Marines who had been watching him since he boarded the ship 3 days ago. Their reptilian faces were difficult for humans to read, but their body language spoke volumes. They thought he was a joke. "The Terran thinks he will make difference," wheezed Sergeant Throckmore, his scales shifting from green to a mottled brown that Marcus had learned indicated amusement. "With his single-shot weapon and soft skin." Marcus finally turned from the viewport, his gray eyes scanning the assembled squad of alien warriors. There were 12 of them in total, representing 4 different species from across the galactic hegemony. Each one was a veteran of dozens of conflicts, their bodies bearing the scars and modifications that spoke of survival against impossible odds. And here he was, a lone human with a rifle and a reputation that preceded him by several star systems. The squad leader, a towering Drakthul named Commander Vosek, spoke without looking up from his tactical display. "The human is here because the High Command believes his species possesses certain unique capabilities. We are to evaluate these claims." "Unique capabilities," Zixtal repeated, his mandibles clicking in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as derision. "The Terrans have been part of the hegemony for barely 50 of their years. What could they possibly offer that we have not already mastered?" Marcus shifted his weight, feeling the familiar heft of his rifle across his back. The weapon was deceptively simple compared to the plasma cannons and energy weapons carried by his squad mates. It was a kinetic projectile system, what the aliens dismissively called a powder thrower, modified with human engineering that they didn't yet fully understand. "Maybe we should ask the Sithektar survivors from the Proxima incident," Marcus said quietly. The transport bay fell silent. The Proxima incident had become something of a legend among hegemony forces, a human colony that had held off an entire Sithektar invasion fleet with nothing but kinetic weapons and what the after-action reports had termed unprecedented tactical flexibility. The official casualty reports were classified, but rumors suggested that entire companies of the reptilian invaders had been eliminated by invisible killers who struck without warning and vanished like ghosts. Commander Vosek's 4 eyes fixed on Marcus for the first time since he'd boarded the transport. The Drakthul's facial tentacles writhed slowly, a sign that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "You were at Proxima," Vosek stated. It wasn't a question. "I was." Marcus met the commander's gaze without flinching. "Along with about 1,000 other humans who the enemy never saw coming." Throckmore's scales had shifted to a dull gray, the Karathi equivalent of unease. "The report said the Sithektar lost 90% of their ground forces before they retreated, but their survivors claimed they were fighting phantoms." "Not phantoms," Marcus said, checking his chronometer as the transport began its final approach to the planetary surface. "Just patient." The next few hours were a blur of briefings, equipment checks, and tactical preparations. The squad was being inserted into the Broken Glass Valley, a strategic choke point that had changed hands 17 times in the past 6 months. Intelligence suggested that the enemy was massing for another push, and the hegemony needed eyes on their movements. Marcus studied the terrain maps with growing interest. The valley was a sniper's paradise, elevated positions, clear fields of fire, and multiple escape routes. The rocky outcroppings would provide excellent concealment, while the enemy would be forced to move through relatively open ground to advance their positions. "The plan is simple," Commander Vosek explained as they gathered around the holographic display. "We establish an observation post here, on the northern ridge. Zixtal and Throckmore will set up heavy weapons positions to cover the main approach. The rest of the squad will maintain a perimeter." "And the human?" asked Velana, a lithe Salathi whose blue skin seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. Her species was known for their exceptional reflexes and grace. They served as assault specialists throughout the hegemony. Vosek's tentacles writhed again. "The human will observe and report what he observes." Marcus noticed that the commander hadn't mentioned the traditional sniper role of eliminating high-value targets. It was clear that despite his reputation, the squad still viewed him as an unknown quantity. That was fine. He'd been underestimated before. The drop went smoothly, their stealth transport depositing them on the valley floor just before dawn. The local sun was a harsh white star that cast everything in sharp relief, creating deep shadows between the rocky formations. Marcus immediately began cataloging potential hide sites, measuring distances with practiced eye, and identifying wind patterns from the way the sparse vegetation moved. The squad moved with professional efficiency, establishing their observation post within an hour of landing. Marcus watched them work, impressed despite himself with their coordination. These weren't just random soldiers thrown together. They were a unit that had fought together before, and it showed in every movement. As the others settled into their positions, Marcus began a careful reconnaissance of the surrounding area. He moved differently than his squad mates, flowing from cover to cover with an almost liquid grace that seemed to puzzle the aliens who caught glimpses of him. Where they relied on superior technology and overwhelming firepower, he depended on stealth, patience, and precision. 3 hours into their watch, Throckmore's voice crackled over the communications system. "Movement in Sector 7. Looks like a patrol." Marcus was already watching the indicated area through his scope. 6 figures were picking their way across the valley floor, moving in a loose formation that spoke of confidence rather than caution. They were hegemony deserters. Marcus could tell from their equipment and the way they carried themselves. Probably mercenaries now, selling their services to whoever paid the most. "Confirmed," he whispered into his comm. 6 hostiles, armed with standard hegemony gear. They're scouting, not patrolling. "Can you see what they are looking for?" Vosek asked. Marcus adjusted his scope's magnification, studying the deserters more carefully. One of them was carrying a specialized scanner, sweeping it back and forth as they moved. Another had what looked like a communications array strapped to his back. "They're looking for us," Marcus said. "Someone told them we were coming." The implication hung heavy in the air. Either their mission had been compromised from the start, or the enemy had better intelligence capabilities than anyone had suspected. Either way, it meant trouble. "Orders?" Zixtal asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Commander Vosek was quiet for a long moment. "We observe only. No engagement unless fired upon." Marcus watched the patrol continue their sweep, noting their patterns and blind spots. They were good, better than he'd expected, but they were also making mistakes that only someone with extensive infantry experience would recognize. They were bunching up when they should have been spread out. They were talking too much, and they were following predictable routes between cover positions. "Commander," Marcus said quietly, "they're going to find us. Maybe not today, but soon. That scanner they're carrying is military grade. It'll pick up our equipment signatures eventually." "Then we will relocate," Vosek replied. "Or," Marcus said, his finger finding the trigger of his rifle. "We eliminate the threat now, while we have the advantage." "Negative. We maintain observation protocols." Marcus bit back his response. He understood the commander's caution. Engaging the patrol would reveal their position to any other enemy units in the area, but it would also eliminate a direct threat to their mission. Sometimes the best defense was a good offense. The patrol spent another 2 hours in the valley before finally withdrawing. Marcus tracked them until they disappeared beyond a ridgeline, noting their exit route and probable destination. When they were gone, he began to move. "Where are you going?" Velana asked as he slipped past her position. "To do some hunting of my own," Marcus replied. He was gone before anyone could object, vanishing into the rocky landscape like smoke. Behind him, he could hear the squad's confused chatter over the comm system, but he'd already switched to a different frequency. Sometimes it was better to ask forgiveness than permission. The terrain was perfect for stalking. Marcus had trained in environments like this, mountain ranges on Earth where a single mistake could mean death. Here, the stakes were just as high, but the principles were the same. Move slowly, stay low, trust your instincts. He found the patrol's campsite 2 kilometers from their original position, tucked into a natural depression that provided excellent concealment from aerial surveillance. There were more than 6 of them now, at least 12, maybe 15, all armed, all dangerous, and all positioned between his squad and their extraction point. Marcus settled into a hide position and began to study his targets. The deserters had discipline, but they also had the overconfidence that came from fighting inferior opponents for too long. They were talking too loudly, moving too carelessly, and trusting too much in their technological advantages. He chose his target carefully, the communications specialist who was setting up a long-range array. Take out communications first, then work on the scouts and heavy weapons specialists. Standard counter-reconnaissance protocol. His rifle was loaded with a special round that he'd developed himself, a flechette design that would tumble after impact, creating devastating wound channels while remaining subsonic to avoid detection. The local atmosphere was thinner than Earth normal, which would affect ballistics, but he'd already compensated for that during his equipment check. Marcus controlled his breathing, feeling his heart rate slow as he entered the meditative state that all great snipers knew. The world narrowed to a single point of focus: the target, the wind, the weapon, and the shot. He was just beginning to apply pressure to the trigger when his comm system crackled to life. "Ghost, this is command. You are ordered to return to position immediately." Marcus didn't move. The shot was perfect. Wind was calm, target was stationary, and no one would know where it came from. One squeeze of the trigger, and the enemy would lose their ability to call for reinforcements. "Ghost, acknowledge." The target shifted slightly, presenting an even better angle. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Terran sniper," came a new voice, Commander Vosek. "You will return to position now or you will be considered to have deserted your post." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the opportunity slip away. When he opened them again, the communications specialist had moved behind cover. "Acknowledged," he whispered into the comm. Returning to position. The journey back took him an hour, moving carefully to avoid detection. When he finally reached the observation post, he found the entire squad waiting for him. Their expressions ranged from confusion to outright hostility. "Explain," Commander Vosek said without preamble. "Enemy patrol established a permanent position 2 clicks south-southeast," Marcus reported, his voice professionally neutral. "Approximately 15 hostiles, including communications and heavy weapons specialists. They're between us and our extraction point. You were ordered to observe only." "I observed. Then I took initiative to gather additional intelligence on a threat to our mission." Throckmore's scales had shifted to an angry red. "You disappeared without orders. You could have compromised our entire position." "I eliminated that risk by maintaining proper concealment protocols." Marcus replied. Something the enemy patrol failed to do. You had a shot, Zixtal said suddenly. I can smell the residue from your weapon preparation. You were ready to engage. Marcus nodded. I was. It would have been a clean elimination of their communications capability. Without authorization, Vosek said, in violation of direct orders. Sometimes the best way to follow orders is to break them, Marcus said quietly. That patrol knows we're here. They're not going to give up and go home. Eventually, they're going to find us, and when they do, we'll be outnumbered 3-1. The squad fell silent, digesting this information. Marcus could see them processing the tactical implications, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Finally, Vosek spoke. You believe engagement is inevitable? I know it is, Marcus replied. The question is whether we choose the time and place, or they do. As if summoned by his words, the sharp crack of energy weapons echoed across the valley. The observation post's perimeter alarms began to wail, and suddenly the air was filled with the whistle of incoming plasma bolts. The enemy had found them. The first plasma bolt missed Marcus's head by centimeters, superheating the air and leaving the distinct smell of ozone and burned rock. He rolled left, feeling fragments of stone pepper his armor as the energy blast carved a molten crater where he'd been lying just seconds before. Contact front, Throckmore's voice boomed across the comm system as he brought his heavy plasma cannon online. Multiple hostiles advancing from the southern ridge. Marcus didn't need to look to know what was happening. The enemy patrol had done exactly what he'd predicted. They'd called for reinforcements, studied the observation post's position, and launched a coordinated assault designed to eliminate the hegemony squad before they could report their findings. Estimated 20-plus hostiles. Zixtal's forearms moved with mechanical precision as he targeted his defensive systems. They have us flanked on 3 sides. Commander Vosek's voice cut through the chaos with cold authority. Defensive positions. Prepare for extraction. But even as the words left his mouth, explosions began to bloom across their intended escape route. The enemy had anticipated their withdrawal and mined the most obvious paths. They were trapped. Marcus low-crawled to the edge of their position, his rifle already unslung and ready. Through his scope, he could see the attacking force moving with professional coordination up the valley slopes. These weren't the same deserters he'd observed earlier. These were equipped with military-grade armor and weapons, moving with the precision of veteran soldiers. Ghost! Vosek's voice found him through the comm. We need target priorities. Who's commanding their assault? Marcus swept his scope across the advancing enemy, looking for the telltale signs of leadership. There, a figure in heavier armor hanging back from the main advance, gesturing to smaller groups as they maneuvered. Classic command positioning. Target identified, Marcus whispered. 700 meters, elevation 15 degrees, behind the large boulder formation. Enemy commander is directing the assault from concealment. Confirmed. Take the shot. The words Marcus had been waiting to hear finally came. He adjusted his scope for the range and elevation, factoring in the thin atmosphere and the slight crosswind that had picked up since morning. The target was partially concealed, presenting only a small section of torso between 2 rocks. Marcus controlled his breathing, letting his heart rate slow even as plasma bolts continued to scream overhead. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, the gap between the rocks, the slight movement that indicated his target's position, and the perfect moment when everything aligned. The rifle's report was almost lost in the thunder of the firefight, but Marcus saw the impact through his scope. The enemy commander spun and dropped. His armor pierced cleanly through by the kinetic projectile that had retained lethal velocity across 700 meters of open ground. Almost immediately, the enemy assault began to lose coordination. Without their central command, the smaller units started making individual decisions instead of following an overall plan. Some continued to advance, others sought cover, and a few began to withdraw entirely. "Command element eliminated," Marcus reported. "Enemy coordination is breaking down." "Impossible," Throckmore grunted between bursts from his plasma cannon. "That was barely 700 meters. No projectile weapon maintains accuracy at that range." "Human weapons are different," Marcus said, already seeking his next target. He found it in a heavy weapons specialist who was setting up what looked like a portable artillery piece. 800 meters, enemy heavy weapons, engaging." The second shot took longer to line up. The target was moving, and Marcus had to lead his aim to compensate for the enemy's movement. When he fired, the result was the same. The heavy weapons specialist pitched forward, his equipment tumbling down the rocky slope. "Two down," Marcus reported. "Recommend immediate counterattack while they're disorganized." But Vosek was already moving, his squad responding to hand signals with the smooth precision of veterans. Zixtel and Vel'Anna flanked left while Throckmore provided covering fire. The remaining squad members began a fighting withdrawal that would take them to higher ground, while Marcus continued to eliminate priority targets. The third shot took out an enemy sniper who'd been trying to get an angle on Zixtal's position. The fourth eliminated a communications specialist who was attempting to call for air support. The fifth and sixth came in rapid succession, targeting squad leaders who were trying to rally their scattered forces. "How many rounds do you carry?" Vel'Anna asked over the comm, her voice tight with concentration as she bounded between cover positions. "Enough," Marcus replied. He was down to his last magazine, but the enemy didn't know that, and with the way their assault was falling apart, he might not need many more shots. The turning point came when a group of enemy soldiers tried to storm the observation post directly. They came up the slope in a coordinated rush, using suppressing fire and movement techniques that would have been devastating against most opponents. But they hadn't accounted for a human sniper with clear fields of fire. Marcus's shots came one after another, each one precisely placed to cause maximum disruption to the assault. He didn't aim for center mass like most snipers. Instead, he targeted weapon systems, communication equipment, and the soldiers who seemed to be providing tactical leadership. Each shot eliminated not just a single enemy, but degraded their entire capability to fight effectively. "That's not possible," Throckmore whispered as he watched the assault dissolve into chaos. 12 shots, 12 hits, at combat ranges. "Under fire." Human neural architecture processes multiple targeting solutions simultaneously, Marcus explained as he reloaded with practiced efficiency. "We call it muscle memory, but it's really predictive calculation at the subconscious level." The remaining enemy forces began to retreat, dragging their wounded and leaving their equipment behind. Marcus tracked them through his scope, but held his fire. They were no longer a threat, and ammunition conservation was always a consideration in extended operations. "Contact broken," Vosek announced. "All stations report status." The squad's status reports came back clean. Minor wounds, equipment damage, but no casualties. They'd faced a numerically superior force in a disadvantageous position and emerged victorious. Marcus holstered his rifle and began policing up brass from his spent cartridges. "Leave the casings," Vel'Anna said. "We need to move before they come back with reinforcements." "The casings tell a story," Marcus replied, continuing to collect the empty shells. "They'll study them, try to figure out what kind of weapon system could achieve this kind of accuracy. Better they waste time chasing impossible theories than understanding the truth." Zixtal's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "And what is the truth?" Marcus straightened, slinging his rifle across his back. "The truth is that humans have been killing each other for about as long as we've existed. We've gotten very good at it." The extraction went smoothly. Their transport arrived within the hour, and soon they were climbing away from Cathara Prime's scarred surface. Marcus found himself at the same porthole where he'd started the mission, watching the planet shrink beneath them. 17 confirmed eliminations, Commander Vosek said as he approached. Zero friendly casualties. The enemy force was completely neutralized. The mission was observation, Marcus pointed out. We gathered the intelligence command needed. We did more than that, Vosek replied. We eliminated a significant enemy asset and sent a clear message about hegemony capabilities. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Throckmore, who'd spent the past hour running diagnostics on his equipment. The Karathi's scales were cycling through colors that Marcus couldn't interpret, a sign of deep emotional conflict. I have reviewed the engagement recordings, Throckmore said. Your weapon fired projectiles at velocities that should not be achievable with chemical propulsion systems. Chemical propulsion enhanced with electromagnetic acceleration, Marcus corrected. The powder charge gets the bullet moving, then magnetic fields take over for the final velocity boost. It's an old human technique. We call it a railgun. But the power requirements are supplied by a miniaturized fusion cell, Marcus finished. Same technology that powers your plasma weapons, just applied differently. Zixtal joined the group, his expression unreadable. The bullets themselves, they were not standard kinetic penetrators. Flechette design, Marcus confirmed. Tungsten core with a depleted uranium jacket, designed to penetrate armor and then fragment for maximum tissue damage. We developed them for hunting large predators on Earth. Large predators? Velana asked. Marcus's expression grew distant. Bears, elephants, humans with hostile intent. He paused, then added, the last category was always the most dangerous. The squad fell silent, processing this information. They'd known that humans were relatively new to the galactic community, but they'd assumed this meant they were less advanced, less capable. The reality was beginning to sink in that humanity's late arrival might not indicate weakness, but rather that they'd been busy perfecting the art of warfare on their own world. How long? Commander Vosek asked carefully. Has your species been engaged in armed conflict? Marcus considered the question. Continuously, about 12,000 years of recorded history. Before that, it's harder to say, but probably longer. We have archaeological evidence of organized warfare dating back at least 20,000 years. 20,000 years of continuous warfare, Throckmore repeated. His scales settling into a pale gray that Marcus was learning indicated something like awe or fear. Not continuous, Marcus corrected. Sometimes there were breaks, weeks, even months, where some part of humanity wasn't actively trying to kill some other part. But those were rare. The implications hung heavy in the transport's recycled air. Most species in the galactic hegemony had experienced warfare, but it was typically brief, localized, and resolved quickly through technological superiority or diplomatic intervention. The idea of a species that had spent millennia refining the techniques of combat was sobering. But you are not at war now, Velana observed. Your people joined the hegemony peacefully. Earth is at peace, Marcus agreed. For the first time in recorded history, the entire planet is united under a single government. It took us about 6 months after first contact to realize that fighting each other was pointless when there was an entire galaxy to explore. 6 months? Vosek's tentacles writhed in what Marcus now recognized as surprise. We're very good at adapting to new situations, Marcus said. It's another survival trait. When the environment changes, you change with it, or you die. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from the ship's captain. They were approaching the fleet rendezvous point, where they would transfer to a larger vessel for the journey back to hegemony space. As they prepared for docking, Marcus noticed that his squad mates were treating him differently than they had at the beginning of the mission. Before, he'd been an unknown quantity, a representative of a species that was barely part of the galactic community. Now, he was something else entirely. They didn't fear him, exactly, but they looked at him with a new kind of respect. The respect that warriors give to other warriors who have proven themselves in combat. There will be other missions, Vosek said as they gathered their equipment. Other threats that require elimination rather than simple observation. I understand, Marcus replied. The High Command will be interested in expanding human participation in combat operations, the commander continued. They will want to know how many others like you are available. Marcus shouldered his rifle and headed toward the airlock. Commander, he said over his shoulder, Earth has a population of about 12 billion people. Of those, roughly 2 billion have some form of military training. About 50 million are what we would consider combat veterans. He paused at the airlock threshold. And every single one of them grew up on a planet where the ability to kill efficiently was the difference between survival and extinction. The airlock cycled, and Marcus disappeared into the larger vessel that would carry them home. Behind him, the squad sat in contemplative silence, each processing the implications of what they'd just learned. Humanity wasn't just another member species of the galactic hegemony. They were something new, something unprecedented in the galaxy's long history. They were warriors not by choice or circumstance, but by evolution, shaped by millennia of conflict into the perfect soldiers. And Marcus Ghost Sullivan was just one of 50 million of them. In the transport's small galley, Zixtal poured himself a ration of fermented nectar and settled in to compose his after-action report. He'd been a soldier for most of his adult life, had fought beside warriors from dozens of different species, and had seen things that would give most civilians nightmares. But he'd never seen anything quite like watching a single human systematically dismantle an entire enemy assault with nothing but patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of how to kill efficiently. He made a note to include a recommendation in his report that human combat specialists be integrated into hegemony forces as quickly as possible, not because they needed the humans' help, but because he never wanted to face them as enemies. The galaxy, Zixtal realized, had just become a much more interesting place. The briefing room aboard the hegemony flagship, Eternal Vigilance, was built to accommodate representatives from 17 different species, but right now it felt cramped with tension. Marcus sat between Commander Vosek and Zixtal, studying the holographic display that showed their target, a fortress world called Zarian's Gate that controlled access to 3 major hyperspace routes. Admiral Cathis, an imposing Velnari whose exoskeleton bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, gestured at the tactical display with one of her 4 arms. The situation is critical. The hegemony has been attempting to retake Zarian's Gate for 8 months with conventional assault tactics. We have lost 43,000 soldiers and 17 capital ships. Marcus watched the playback of previous assault attempts, noting the defensive positions and the devastating effectiveness of the fortress's automated systems. The enemy had turned the entire world into a killing field, with overlapping fields of fire that could destroy entire assault waves before they reached the outer defenses. Intelligence suggests that the fortress is controlled by a central command facility located here, Admiral Cathis continued, highlighting a structure at the heart of the defensive network. However, it is protected by energy shields, automated defenses, and an estimated 3,000 enemy soldiers. What's the proposed solution? Asked Colonel Rathek, a veteran Drakthul officer whose tactical expertise had earned him command of the elite strike forces. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was the Velnari equivalent of grim satisfaction. We have received authorization to implement the Terran Protocol. The room fell silent. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze settling on him, but his expression remained neutral as he processed the implications. The Terran Protocol was still classified at the highest levels, but word had leaked through the military hierarchy about the human sniper who had single-handedly broken an enemy assault and eliminated 17 targets in perfect succession. Explain the mission parameters, Commander Vosek said. Single infiltrator insertion, Admiral Cathis replied. Elimination of command and control capabilities. Mission duration not to exceed 72 hours standard. Marcus studied the fortress schematics, his mind automatically calculating ranges, angles, and infiltration routes. What's the enemy composition? Mixed forces. Primarily Scythectar regulars with mercenary support. They have orbital defense platforms, ground-based shields, and what our reconnaissance suggests is a network of underground tunnels connecting their major installations. Air support? None available. The orbital defenses make close support impossible, and the energy shields prevent accurate bombardment of the command facility. Marcus nodded slowly. It was essentially a suicide mission. Insert a single operative into the heart of enemy territory, eliminate their command structure, and somehow survive long enough for a conventional assault to succeed. The kind of mission that would normally require an entire special operations company if it could be accomplished at all. Time frame for the assault? He asked. 78 hours from insertion. The fleet will begin its approach as soon as you signal that the command facility has been neutralized. And if I don't signal? Admiral Kathis's expression didn't change. Then we attempt a conventional assault and accept whatever casualties are necessary to retake this system. The meaning was clear. Failure wasn't just an option, it was the expected outcome. The High Command was throwing a single human at an impossible problem on the slim chance that the rumors about their capabilities were true. Marcus stood and approached the holographic display, studying it from different angles. The fortress was indeed impregnable by conventional standards, but he was beginning to see possibilities that others might miss. Weaknesses that could be exploited by someone with patience, skill, and an understanding of how defensive systems worked. "I'll need specialized equipment," he said finally. "Anything you require," Colonel Rathek assured him. "Long-range reconnaissance drone, stealth configured, extended duration life support system, and I want to speak with whoever designed the Hegemony's standard sniper rifles." The next 18 hours were a blur of preparation and planning. Marcus worked with the ship's technical specialists to modify his equipment for the mission parameters, while simultaneously studying every scrap of intelligence about Xerion's gate and its defenders. The fortress was indeed a masterpiece of defensive architecture. Built into a natural mountain range, it presented virtually no vulnerable approaches. The command facility was buried deep underground, accessible only through heavily defended tunnels that were constantly patrolled and monitored. But Marcus wasn't planning a conventional infiltration. "You want to do what?" Chief Engineer Moltar asked, his scales shifting to the deep red that indicated profound skepticism. "Orbital insertion directly onto the fortress superstructure," Marcus repeated. "Single-man drop pod, minimal heat signature, landing in the sensor shadow of their primary communications array." "The impact alone will kill you," Throckmore observed. "Even with full armor and impact mitigation systems." Marcus shook his head. "Not if we modify the pod's deceleration sequence. I don't need to survive a traditional landing, I just need to get close enough to deploy." Velana studied the insertion plan with growing interest. "You are not planning to enter the facility through conventional means." "No," Marcus agreed. "I'm planning to stay outside and eliminate their command structure from external positions." The assembled officers exchanged glances. Even after witnessing his capabilities firsthand, the idea of eliminating targets inside a heavily shielded facility from external positions seemed impossible. "The command bunker is 800 meters underground," Admiral Kathis pointed out, "protected by energy shields and 30 meters of reinforced armor plating." "But the command staff can't stay underground forever," Marcus replied. "They have to coordinate their defenses, which means they have to have observation points, communication arrays, and command posts at ground level. Those are my targets." Commander Vosek's tentacles writhed thoughtfully. "You are planning to eliminate their leadership rather than their facility." "Exactly. Cut off the head, and the body dies. Without central coordination, their automated systems become predictable, their defensive positions become isolated strong points that can be eliminated individually rather than part of a coordinated network. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of trying to break through the fortress's defenses, Marcus would eliminate the people who controlled those defenses, one shot at a time with precision and patience, until the enemy's command structure collapsed entirely. The insertion went flawlessly. Marcus's modified drop pod streaked through Xerion's gate's atmosphere like a meteor, its stealth systems reducing its signature to almost nothing. When the pod impacted the fortress's outer structure, it buried itself in a tangle of communication equipment and defensive sensors, creating the perfect concealment for his operation. Marcus emerged from the pod in full environmental gear, his rifle already configured for the mission parameters. The fortress's superstructure stretched around him like a metal landscape. All towers and defensive emplacements and the constant hum of energy systems. He set up his first hide position in the wreckage of a sensor array, with clear sight lines to the fortress's primary command towers. Through his scope, he could see enemy soldiers moving between positions, their body language confident and relaxed. They had no idea that death had just arrived on their doorstep. The first target was a Sci-Fi colonel who was conducting an inspection of the outer defensive positions. Marcus tracked him for 20 minutes, learning his patterns and identifying the moment when he would be most vulnerable. When the shot came, it was perfect. A single round that eliminated the fortress's senior field commander and sent his staff scrambling for cover. But Marcus was already moving to his second position. The beauty of the plan was that the enemy couldn't respond effectively to his attacks. They knew they were under fire, but they couldn't determine where the shots were coming from. Marcus was using the fortress's own structure as concealment, firing from positions that were technically inside their defensive perimeter, but completely invisible to their sensors. The second target was a communications specialist who was trying to coordinate the response to the colonel's death. The third was a technical officer who was attempting to recalibrate the automated defense systems. The fourth and fifth were squad leaders who were organizing search parties to find the sniper. Each elimination created more chaos, more confusion, and more opportunities for follow-up attacks. Command, "This is Ghost," Marcus whispered into his comm system after his 8th confirmed kill. "Enemy leadership is fragmenting. Defensive coordination is breaking down." "Confirmed, Ghost," came Admiral Cathis' voice across the interstellar communication link. "Fleet is moving to assault positions. How much longer do you need?" Marcus studied the fortress through his scope, watching as individual defensive positions began operating independently rather than as part of a coordinated system. "Give me 12 more hours. I want to eliminate their entire command structure before you begin your approach." The next 10 hours were a masterclass in precision elimination. Marcus moved through the fortress's superstructure like a ghost, appearing long enough to take his shots and then vanishing before the enemy could respond. He eliminated commanders, technicians, communications specialists, and anyone else who looked like they might be capable of providing tactical leadership. By the time the hegemony fleet began its final approach, the fortress's defense had devolved into isolated pockets of resistance with no central coordination. The automated systems were still functional, but they were operating on pre-programmed responses rather than adaptive tactics. "Fleet Command, this is Ghost," Marcus reported as he watched the first wave of hegemony assault ships begin their attack run. "Enemy command structure has been eliminated. Automated defenses are operating on default protocols. Recommend concentrated assault on sectors 7 through 12. Their overlapping fields of fire have been disrupted." The battle that followed was unlike any previous assault on Xerion's gate. Without central command, the fortress's defenses were devastatingly effective but tactically predictable. Hegemony forces were able to identify and exploit gaps in the coverage, systematically eliminating defensive positions that would have been impregnable under unified command. Marcus continued to provide sniper support throughout the assault, eliminating enemy soldiers who attempted to organize local defenses or establish new command posts. By the time hegemony forces reached the fortress's inner defenses, effective resistance had collapsed entirely. The formal surrender came 18 hours after the assault began, a new record for operations against a fortress of Zirion's Gate's complexity. Marcus was extracted by the first wave of assault troops, who found him in a concealment position that provided overwatch for the entire central courtyard. He'd eliminated 43 targets over 36 hours of continuous operations, effectively decapitating an entire defensive network with nothing but patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of how command structures functioned. The after-action debriefing was held in the same room where the mission had been planned, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of skepticism and desperation, there was a sense of awe and possibility. Casualty reports, Admiral Cathis announced. Hegemony forces, 237 wounded, 18 killed. Enemy forces, complete elimination of command structure. Surrender of remaining garrison. Mission time, 36 hours. She paused, studying Marcus with all four of her eyes. This represents the most successful fortress assault in hegemony military history. Commander Vosek leaned forward. The High Command is requesting a full tactical analysis of human combat capabilities. They want to know how many more like you are available, Colonel Rathek added. Marcus cleaned his rifle with practiced motions, his expression thoughtful. Earth's military command has been reviewing hegemony tactical doctrine since we joined the Alliance. They've identified several areas where human techniques might be applicable. Such as? Admiral Cathis asked. Infiltration and elimination tactics, long-range reconnaissance, psychological warfare, counterinsurgency operations. Marcus paused, then added. We're also working on developing training programs to teach other species some of our techniques. Zixtal's mandibles clicked with interest. You would share your military knowledge? That's what allies do, Marcus replied simply. We protect each other, we teach each other, and we make sure that everyone benefits from our combined strength. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't just offering their services as soldiers. They were proposing to revolutionize hegemony military doctrine entirely, to share techniques that had been refined over thousands of years of continuous warfare and turn them into tools for galactic peace. There is one other thing, Marcus said, setting down his rifle and meeting Admiral Cathis's gaze. The High Command should understand that what you saw today, this mission, these techniques, this isn't what makes humans dangerous. It is not? Velana asked. Marcus shook his head. What makes humans dangerous is that we've spent our entire evolutionary history learning how to work together. How to coordinate with people we've never met, from cultures we don't understand, for goals we might not completely agree with. What makes us dangerous is that we're really, really good at making friends. He stood, slinging his rifle across his back. And now we have 12 billion humans who are very interested in making friends with everyone in this galaxy. The briefing room erupted in the clicking, chittering, and growling sounds that represented laughter among the various assembled species. But underneath the amusement was a current of something else, recognition perhaps, or anticipation. The galaxy had just discovered that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their skill at warfare. It was their capacity for alliance. 3 months later, the first integrated human-alien tactical units began training operations. 6 months after that, the hegemony's military effectiveness had increased by an average of 40% across all operational theaters. Human tactical advisors were attached to every major fleet command, and hegemony officer training programs had been completely revised to incorporate human strategic doctrine. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Other species began to understand that humanity's late arrival to the galactic community wasn't a sign of weakness or primitive development. It was the result of a species that had been so busy perfecting the art of cooperation that they hadn't noticed they were ready for the stars. Marcus Ghost Sullivan returned to Earth 6 months after the Xerian's Gate operation, carrying with him a commendation from the Galactic Hegemony High Command and an offer to establish the first integrated military academy on human soil. The offer was accepted, and construction began immediately on what would become the most advanced tactical training facility in the known galaxy. The Academy's motto, inscribed in 17 different languages above its main entrance, was simple: victory through unity. It was, Marcus reflected as he watched the first class of mixed-species cadets begin their training, a very human concept that had finally found its place among the stars. The galaxy would never be the same.